Alright, well, I want to go over some history on the steam engine. If you look up steam engine designs from, what is it, 1769, you get this kind of design right here. This was a steam driven automobile that was made in 1769. And if you look up steam engine designs that came after 1769, you seem to get these kind of designs like this, where there's a tank, a flywheel, a piston. Like the early steam engines that we hear about that first came really efficient for the Industrial Revolution was designs like these, where it had a cylinder, like a flywheel, and the steam would drive one side up and down, or this side, I mean, the steam would fill in here, drive this up, and it would pump out water over here. Uh, so that's what the early steam engine designs that we learn about in school. But before this, you can't find any sort of design other than something like as simple as this, where you have wooden wheels, a cauldron or tank, like a metal pot with a spigot that allows steam to then be pushed onto a pulley system that drives these wheels. Like this was the first design that wasn't mobile, when you had a basic steam driven piston like this that would drive these two as teeter totter weights here up and down. And these were the first steam engine designs. Then for an automobile, you go into these kind of designs. So if you kind of like think about it, like how did we go from this to something like this in a matter of like 10 or 20 years? It doesn't seem to make much sense if you look into the history of these steam engines. That sometime in the past we figured out how to make a basic steam automobile like this that pushes. This looks like a big pot that would be on a stove with a spigot that would push a cylinder up and down that would drive a wheel. Very basic. But then all of a sudden, after that, 10, 20 years after that, we go into like almost a train locomotive type design. Like you don't see any innovation where you go from this basic um, steam engine design to these like marvelous, like huge locomotive tank like systems. So it seems like there's a section of our history that is missing when it comes to steam engines. Because how do we go from this to this, where you have the metal tank, piston, flywheel, sophisticated kind of pulley system here, all in a metal tank? How we all of a sudden go from this design to that basic car-like design, all of a sudden to full scale sized, locomotive engines like this. And it doesn't work that way. Like the, when people are adding on to somebody else's invention, first somebody's invention has to get invented, Like then the word has to spread, which was very difficult because there was no electronic communications back then. It had to be word of mouth. So, and the person who hears about the invention ends up building one of their own, and they'll usually add on to it. They'll add like a flywheel pulley system. Like this looks like the only kind of sophisticated system that would be in between that simple car design and a locomotive full scale train like this. Like we go from that to that to that all in the span of like 30 years, from 1769 till the early 1800s. So something in our history is missing there. I don't see how we can go from this simple design all of a sudden to a full scale locomotive engine design like this, all in a span of 30 years. 18th century. So 18th century, that means that's the 1700s. So that was from 1769 between the beginning of the 19th century, we had this. So in the span of 30 years, we went from that basic four-wheel car design to that in 30 years, and we began the Industrial Revolution. So to me, it seems like something's missing. How do we go from this to this in 30 years? Or from this to this? And then all of a sudden to full scale rooms of machinery like this. It just doesn't make any sense. You slowly invent something like this as people add to it over time. You don't just go from this to something sophisticated like this in 30 years. Not in that timeline. Not in this not in the mankind's history. So maybe somebody can figure that one out. Where did the history of our innovation to steam engines go? There seems to be a chunk of history that is missing.